an emergent issue that is being faced by Christians and apologists and churches and organizations all across this world as same-sex civil unions are being legalized in the U.S. and in other countries is that if a person who is in a union of that type, or as transgenderism and transsexuality becomes more and more prominent as well. If somebody is in the process of transitioning and they get married, and then they have their, not just their own personal decision to follow Christ, but also obviously someone else is being affected by that decision. What do you do? And of course, people have gotten uh, deep into the weeds in every direction of that. On the one hand, well, you stay married because God hates divorce, but you abstain from sexual contact, especially in the instance if there's children involved, because same-sex adoption is legal in many jurisdictions uh, among same-sex unions, or even single individuals that identify as homosexual or as transgender. If they want to adopt, that is a thing that happens. So if there's children involved, what do? Do you just stay married under the law because God hates divorce? Or on the other side, there is that you have a duty to sever that civil union, that contract, in order to pursue after your new life direction, your new world, in order to align things in a more consistent manner with your worldview. So what do? And quite frankly, obviously the word transgender doesn't appear in Scripture, so we don't have a direct prescriptive ordinance for it. Scripture doesn't speak to it that directly, but there are some interesting things throughout Scripture that can. Some will say that you need to stay married in a manner consistent with what Peter wrote in the New Testament, that if a person is married to an unbeliever and they're willing to live peacefully together, then you should stay married in hopes that your witness to that person in close quarters will also bring them along to faith. And that's a reasonable, though dangerous, course of action. Then there is something that it's not a direct ordinance, but there is something of a historical descriptive precedent, possibly, meaning that it's something that did happen, but even in the text itself, it does not rule positively or negatively. It just says that this is what's happened. And it's in the book of Ezra, which, if you don't know that, Ezra was one of the priests from when the people were displaced into Babylon and Persia. They were then sent back, and Ezra presided over the process of building the temple and reestablishing the feasts and the sacrifices and things that Israel had covenanted themselves to God. And as they were going through, in the very last chapter, chapter 10, people begin to deal with their sins during the displacement, the diaspora. And so Ezra is praying and says that there's certain people, the priests and the Levites, that have married foreign women, which is a significant issue in ancient cultures, because specifically it was forbidden in Levitical law, in Numbers, and in Deuteronomy. It says that the Levites and the priests were not to marry foreign women, but it's also one of the ways that Balaam, in the book of Numbers, used specifically to corrupt and seduce the nation of Israel in order to pursue after idols, and that God specifically said that you are not supposed to marry their women, and you're not supposed to receive their sons to marry your daughters as well, because it'll cause them and their idol worship to infiltrate your culture. And that's exactly what happened over and over and over again. The entire book of Judges is dedicated to this, and the tail end of Joshua, and so many other passages where people would marry And that influence is a very strong influence when you're married to someone. If they have a contradictory view of the world theologically, it will deteriorate your own, which is why Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 7 that we're not to be unequally yoked. This is 6. 1 Corinthians 6. Don't be unequally yoked. Literally, that James even writes that you'll be dragged away by your temptations. Don't do it. But they did. And so this is the resolution they make. And it says that in verse 2, they confess, we've broken faith with our God, we've married foreign women from the peoples of the land, but even now there's hope. And what they resolve to do is that they're going to send away those women. And it even says that there are certain children involved. It says it 4 different times. There were children, some of them that had born children. We're going to send them away and dissolve those marriages. And it gets all the way to the end, verse 44. All of these had married foreign women, and some of them, the women, had even born children. And that's it. That's the end. It doesn't say that they were rewarded for this. It does not. God is silent on the matter. The priests even. It's not that like Ezra and the other priests don't say that this must be done. It doesn't say that. It just says that this is what these men did. It doesn't even talk about aftermath. It doesn't say where they sent the women, if they sent them back to their father's house, which is probably the most likely. Doesn't say. It just says that they divorced these women and then they moved on with their lives. So, does that mean that we have a liberty present, that if you are same-sex attracted and you have joined yourself in a civil union, a contractual obligation with another person of the same sex, you come to Christ later, are you permitted to seek a dissolution to that contract? Maybe. Like I said, if God speaks very clearly and very strongly against instances where there is divorce, such as in Malachi, where it says, you've divorced the wife of your youth, speaking directly to the Levites and the priests again. Yet he does not speak forcefully about this issue. So maybe it is permitted because of the fact that the union was originally a violation. But then that allows some interesting questions to creep in again of that, so does that mean two people that were having premarital sex, that were fornicating with one another, they get married? They were committing sin as well prior or in the midst of their marriage. Are they permitted to dissolve? And to which just about every theologian that I've ever met, I've ever heard of, would say no, because it's not the standing before the priest that made you married, it's the laying together in bed that made you married. So it is a special case, and it is a delicate issue, and there is no simple solutions, and there's nothing that we can see that allows. And one of the things about it is that it's not handled, I think, not that like the Old Testament knew what homosexuality was, but it doesn't speak to it, I think, because the fact that it wanted people to use nuance. There's several things throughout Scripture that are spoken to in general terms or not spoken to at all, I think, because of the fact that when there's a hard rule, legalists will use that as a rod to beat people with and abuse them, rather as an object of grace to minister to them with. And I think that this is some of the issue where there's no direct commandment to force us into being more gracious and more sympathetic and more willing and open to seeking a resolution rather than just condemning people for what they have done or decisions that they have made that maybe they regret now.